A very good morning to you. This is Motivation Monday, where we bring you challenging conversations and inspiring stories. Well, what have you been learning from the various conversations that we have been having? In what ways has your life been changed? We'd love to hear from you. 20316 is our SMS line. 0786316316 is our WhatsApp line. We also spread out throughout the country. And if you like to find some of our frequencies, if you're in Nairobi, it is 103.9 FM, Nyeri 87.9 FM, Mombasa 97.9 FM, Nakuru 102.1 FM, Meru 107.7 FM, and Kisumu 96.5 FM. Now, perhaps we've heard the famous phrase, serikali saidia. Or perhaps for you, it is you look at your life and you're thinking, I really don't think I have anything to offer the world. Maybe you go for family get-togethers and your family members are high-flying and you're there wondering, what do I have to offer here? Whatever space you find yourself in, and you look at your life and you see yourself more as a victim. Well, today's conversation, it is our prayer, will change your mindset about yourself, because today we are talking about everyone has something to offer. And the guest that I have today is one that will motivate you and inspire you to start reconsidering your life. She works in a space where the individuals she works with actually could easily think just like you would think. But she has better ideas and better thoughts regarding this. Please help me welcome Mrs. Marian. Karibu sana.
Thanks, Mokaya.
Yes, wow, thank you so much for just agreeing to do this. I'm not even sure 1 hour will be enough for us just to have this conversation, you know, in terms of what a wealth of knowledge. But also your life experience is quite exciting, and would like to hear that. So just begin by telling us briefly, who is Marian? Let's begin there.
That is, first of all, can I say, I've known Mokaya, but I've never seen you like in a presentation. So this has been so warm, heartwarming to see. So yes, so my name is Marian. How would I describe Marian? That is such a good question. I am 34 years old, right? Just about to leave.
Lady doesn't tell much.
Oh yeah, that's because I'm about to leave the CDF fund number. So, and I have worked for about 14 years in Kenya from corporate. So I worked for agency in advertising. I worked for telecommunications for Airtel and Safaricom. And then now I work in a humanitarian organization. We support refugees across the world. I am also a wife of one, a mom of 2 children, who when they watch this would want to know that I said their names are Tugi, who is 7, and TJ, who is 4. Such a bundle of excitement. And more recently, actually, I've started going into angel investing, which is investing in Kenyan businesses. Yeah, in the hope that and I'm investing in 2 ways. One in terms of money, but also in terms of my expertise. So I come on board on both ends, which I'm really excited because I think there's a lot of opportunity in Kenyan companies, and I think they need a lot more homegrown investment. Yeah, but I'm also a Christian, a Jesus lover, Jesus follower, have been since I was in university. I'm not those people who remember the date and time, but I remember what happened around it. And it's also been really interesting how I think my journey, my struggles through work, through having value in work, and how God has fashioned those instances that today I can actually stand and say, I think I love my job and I love what I do. And I find a lot of joy in being able to be productive in that way.
All right, thank you. So you've mentioned something interesting, and I think it ties into what we're talking about. At 34 in Kenya, you're pretty young, but you've worked for 14 years. You have a family. And I think you present 2 aspects of this conversation that are crucial to have. First, you are young. Second, you are a lady. And I think especially in the context we are in, those seem to predispose one to a certain disadvantage, so to speak. But now I want us to just touch on something as we bring that out. 14 years working. In what spaces have you worked? You've mentioned Airtel. You've mentioned Safaricom. Which came first?
Airtel.
Okay.
Airtel.
Yeah.
So I can share that. I mean, and it's true. Not only am I a lady and I'm young, I have piercings, which, by the way, is something I used to be told would make it more difficult. So when I finished university, I honestly wanted to be an ambassador to Kenya, like for Kenya. Like I was going to be marketing Kenya to the world.
Yeah, what did you study?
International relations,
okay.
right? But at that time, I began to realize there was a disillusionment around UN, right? Which is you study and then you think you're going to get a job in an industry and you learn the industry doesn't work the way you thought, right? To get a job even in those organizations, you felt like you needed to know somebody. And so I got called to advertising. And this is what's so interesting, Woka. The reason I got called to advertising is because I used to volunteer or raise my hand for gigs. You know the way companies come to uni and say, we're looking for young people who want to, let's say, market a product or sample a product, give us your feedback. Like my hand would always be raised, right? In fact, I remember there's one where I was almost those, you know those people who used to stand near roundabouts handing out flyers. I almost got that gig, but I was like, my mom will beat me if she sees me on the highway. So I got a different gig, but I used to always raise my hand. And so when I finished university, it's one of those companies that told me, we want you to come and work for us. So I graduated on a Friday, I had the job on Monday.
Wow.
Right? And I remember that time even asking God, I want to be in international relations, but my father was also clear, we don't give money after university, pocket money. So
really?
Yes, I knew I needed to do something to survive. So I did advertising. And I remember doing that for about 4 years and feeling like I wanted to understand how companies make decisions around investment. So for context for the audience, I used to work in the advertising agency. So we used to receive briefs. A client comes and says, I sell milk. How do I get more Kenyans to drink my milk? And we would advise. But I wanted to understand how does that company make the decision on what milk to actually push. And so that's how I ended up moving to Airtel as head of brand and media. I loved my time.
Head of brand and media.
Yeah, I loved my time.
Wait.
I was quite young.
Yeah, quite young.
Yeah,
that's the thing. This is like 20 what?
I was probably 20, maybe 23.
Head of what?
Head of brand and media. But I mean, and this is the other irony of it. Airtel was and is, people consider it a smaller company than Safaricom. But because it was small, it didn't have hang-ups. If you can do the job, you'll be allowed to do the job. If you want to, they were very open to opening that platform up for you. And so imagine, okay, I go for my interview. If I tell guys this story, how I go for the interview, and they ask me, what salary do you want? And you know, I mean, my context is only what I was earning before. And I told them the number, and they looked at me, and they're like, okay. They didn't even give me what I asked for. They gave me what the band was supposed to offer, which was more than what I had asked for, right? So Airtel was very honorable in very many ways. I think they were like, you're young, you don't know, but it doesn't mean we'll undermine that. So yeah, I was in Airtel head of brand and media. And then after a year, they told me, I think you have an opportunity to work in revenue. Like, I think you have skill sets outside of marketing as well. Are you open to that? And so that's how I ended up doing segment marketing. So I was head of youth, mass, and campus consumer segments, right? So we're the ones who launched Unlimited.
Wait. You know, I use that quite a bit.
Yeah.
So you are part of those.
Unlimited makes me proud. I use it till today. It makes me proud because it was the first in Kenya. It was the first one that offered unlimited, internet. And it was such a good team to work on that. Yes, we did Unlimited. We did Smartika, which is a promotion. And so I really got to create products and services for a segment that I care about. And then at that point is when now Safaricom were creating a segmentation unit, and they wanted somebody to come and lead the youth segment. And so that's when I got offered a job to lead youth segment in Safaricom. And at that time, I was 20. Legally, they probably say, but really it was because the job description needed you to have experience in segmentation. We were the only teams in Kenya, in telco, who were doing segmentation. And so I was leading the youth segment. And that one was particularly, that's where I think I felt my youthfulness. Because when I joined Safaricom, I did not know that I was young. I never felt young in any organization. They made me feel young. And almost like I had to earn the right. While everywhere else, I think I felt like you're being smart was sufficient. And I did that for about 2 years, and then I left and went back to advertising for about 6 years, doing head of strategy, and then later became managing director for the agency. And then about a year or so ago, 2 years ago, I left and moved to humanitarian.
Now, before we move, you've moved quickly through a detail I think that would be important. So you've moved from Airtel to Safcom, but you're still in telco. In Safcom, what do you look back? I mean, in Airtel, you have Unlimited that you are involved with. In Safcom, what do you have that you are involved in that you also look back and you're like, wow, I did that?
I mean, for sure. So one of the things that again, this is what's so interesting. When I moved to Safaricom, one of the things I remember asking God at that time was, why? Because Safaricom, yes, is bigger and the benefits would be more, but I think I was also very cautious because I know big organizations come with their own dynamics. And at that point, I think there was I felt a strong sense of youth, like young people. And so when I went to Safaricom as head of youth, I was like, this is fantastic. And one of the challenges Safaricom gave me at that time was, we are loved as Safaricom, but young people don't love us, right? And when we did research, what we kept hearing young people say is because Safaricom feels like, you know, the relationship you don't want to be in, but you must be in, right? Because you're big and you're the one with the largest network, but I don't like you. And so what we did is create a sub-brand called Blaze, right? Which was Blaze by Safaricom. So the idea there was to create this sub-brand that had the benefits of the mother brand, but could tailor and speak to the young people, like actually listen to what they're saying and be more agile. So we had Blaze, the SIM card, we had the products and services, we had the Blaze Summits, which I love, which was around showing young Kenyans that there's unconventional ways to success. Being a barber, it can be successful. Being a drummist can be successful. Being a spoken word artist. And I think what we were trying to say is there's actually money in these spaces. So we're not talking about proud just because you have talent, but because there is money, you know. And one of the things I was really proud of as Blaze is that we paid these people to come and be mentors, right? We paid the influencers, we paid the barbers, we paid the makeup artists. Like, we're trying to show society they have something to offer, and that what they have to offer is actually valuable from a financial perspective. And one of the stories I remember is one of the drummists on our ads told us how when the ad came on at home, it was probably one of the first times she had her parents call relatives to say she's on TV. And you know, in Kenya, there's this joke we make. I mean, you know, there's 5 careers. You can either be a doctor, an engineer, a lawyer, I think, I can't remember the last one, doctor, engineer, lawyer, architect, or a disgrace. You know, that's the general idea, right? And I think the thing is, what do parents want to tell their relatives? You and I are a disgrace. Like, do your parents want to call relatives and say, she's been hired as? And that girl said it was the first time her parents were calling people, say she's a drummer, and she's on TV. And anyway, so Blaze is something I was very proud of, and that we were able to launch in Safaricom.
So you've done, wow. We are seated with... So you've done Unlimited in Airtel. You've done Blaze in Safaricom. I mean, these are big things. This is not, and that's why I don't want us to gloss over that. And you're still young. And I think there's just something there, even before we quickly move into the next stage of your life. I mean, there's a young person out there, and they're just feeling, I'm just 25, you know, there's so much, you know, I will do, you know, when I'm 30, when I'm in 40, but at 25 or in your mid-20s, you've done actually quite a bit. You had offered quite a bit. I mean, what do you say to a young person that feels, I am inexperienced, I am young, and maybe I don't have much that I can give to the world?
I mean, so to be honest, I don't think I would, whenever I think about that question, I think my struggle is I usually feel I don't think there's anything to tell young people. I think my struggle has always been, I think society has just refused. And I use it even today. When I think about advertising, one of the biggest, I don't know if people have noticed it, but there's a time when brands used to advertise to young people. They saw them as the future consumers. Brands have stopped. Because they said, you know, you don't have money today and you're too expensive. For me, I'll focus on the person who has money today. And unfortunately, it doesn't matter, and I say this genuinely, I can tell you everything I want to tell you, but I also recognize a lot of what I benefited from was favor, right? It's a boss who, 2 ways. There are bosses who pushed me. There's a story I give about, and one thing I'll tell you about being young is we're very self-confident. And I remember she sat me down when I was in advertising and told me, Marian, you're smart, but you're not the smartest person, right? And so if you don't change your attitude, you will not go anywhere. And I think for her it was, you're smart, but you have an assumption that you're the smartest person. And that is blocking your ability to raise your hand up, to volunteer, to give more, right? Now, what she did may sound like mean to some people, but I feel like she actually bothered to invest in teaching me something about my youthfulness that is both good but needs to be tamed. And so maybe the only thing maybe I'll tell a young person is I hope you have people around you who care enough to invest in sharpening you. Because I think there's things about being youthful that is fantastic, but there's things that also need to be tamed. And I don't feel like society does a good job of holding both of those very well. But the other thing I also do say is just volunteering. Honestly, raising my hand to help a friend do a gig, taking a friend who's going for an interview, like those things. Like there are times, I know of people who got jobs because they took their friend for an interview and were seated there. But for sure, I do feel parents, media, corporate need to do a lot more in helping hold the beauty. Government, of course. I think in holding the beauty and the difficulty of being young together. I think
all right, thank you. I think that's I like the tension, so that, you know, we also don't want to leave a young person feeling, I've wasted my life. You're actually saying the environment contributes quite a bit. But you're saying there are certain things that you can try do, like you've mentioned, you know, try volunteering, you know, raise your hand, you know, intentionally have people around you that can, you know, help you and sharpen you and stuff like that. But quickly, because I want us to just take a short break, I also wouldn't want someone to feel, wow, that chick is so high-flying. Oh, no. I have wasted my life. And you touched on something when you're talking about Blaze, you know, how you try to redefine this whole idea of success. And so just speak into that space, you know, that our paths, you know, will be different.
That is true.
Yeah.
That is true. That is, I think, of all the things I'm most proud of is that. I think there's we used to call it there's unconventional routes to success, right? And I think it's ironic because we define success on the majority, yet we acknowledge we're all unique. It's like the oxymoron of life, right? Yeah. But if we're all unique, why are the paths only 5 or 4? And I will tell you the truth, the number of people or young guys we met that shocked us with the level of talent, just because they realized they were good at something and they focused, right? And they focused and did it really well, that they created their own niche, right? And I'll also say, they created their own niche in an honest, honorable way. I'm not talking about people these weren't entrepreneurs, not in a bad way. These were like acrobats, like the acrobats you see out, like they were genuinely invested in their skill set and talent. And what I really appreciated about the late Bob Collymore then is he valued that as well. Like he was like, young people, the more routes to success we have, the more color you have in the world, right? If the only thing young people have to look up to is a politician as a definition of wealth and success, you will end up with a country that only sees that as, I'll do anything to get to that way, right? Yeah. But Mokaya, if more people can see there's 100 different ways people have gotten there, then they're more content in acknowledging my path may take longer or look different, but imagine there's ways to get there. Yeah. And I feel that elevating, shining the light on, talking more about celebrating those unconventional paths to success. I look and I'm like, look at the Kenya comedic scene. Look at the number of comedians we have that bring joy our way.
That's true.
That I think none of us could imagine not having been there without them. And it's just because someone was able to show there's a way to success that doesn't look like engineer, doctor, lawyer.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Welcome back. This is Motivation Monday. And what a conversation we are having today. Everyone has something to offer. Quite a story we are receiving from our guest. Wow. Young, but not so young in terms of the wealth of experience that she has had. Please would like to hear from you. 20316 is our SMS line. 0786316316 is our WhatsApp line. If you're watching this on YouTube, please share this link. This could actually transform somebody's life. And so let's get back to this conversation that we are having. Welcome back, Marian.
Thank you.
Yeah. So now we are done with telco. So now you have done your Airtel gig, you've done your Safaricom gig. Now you go into what? Agency?
Agency.
Now, some of us are a bit lay, so we don't understand. What is this agency, Biashara?
So agency it's advertising agency. So we are an agency in that we act on behalf of brands to advertise for them. Okay. Right? So I worked for one of the biggest advertising agencies at the time, WPP Scan Group, and for their media. So for example, I would come to like a radio station or TV station and say, we have a client who wants to sell shoes, and we know that women of this age are listening to this show on your station. Could we advertise on that show? So that's a lot of what I used to do. But I came back to advertising as the head of strategy. Okay. Right? So my job was mostly to help clients with insights, right? And insights was, what is it about the way this customer behaves that we need to be listening to as we prepare the advertising. One of the best examples I give is with new moms. So one of the things we know is that new moms, 70% of the purchases new moms make are wasteful, because new moms are anxious. They don't know if they're going to do a good job, so they overcompensate by buying more than they need to, right? But we also know second-time moms are wiser. So there's a brand I know that used to focus on advertising second-time moms, and they used to say, because we're the wiser choice. Like, they knew the mom will get it. Like, we're not the fancy ones, we're not cool, but you'll understand. So that's what I used to spend a lot of time doing, is what's the insight behind why people are behaving the way they are. But I was also responsible for culture. And that was around how do we create an environment in advertising, which is known to be very toxic, where people can thrive, right? And I mean, I'll be honest, advertising, because of the industry we're in, we used to get a lot of free tickets. You know, you're bought for free meals, you're bought for alcohol, you're taken out, because everyone's trying to woo you to spend on their station. Yeah. And so the environment could sometimes be toxic. In the working hours were late, rewards were alcohol, which isn't, I mean, there's ways to reward people that's a bit more, you know, holistic. And so part of it was, how do we create a culture where young people, because advertising has a lot of young people, could thrive. I did that for about 4 years, and then I got promoted now to lead the agency, which I did for about 2 years or 3. And then I knew I was tired and I needed to take a break, so I took a sabbatical, and then I just didn't go back after the sabbatical. Okay.
Yeah. So before we get into sabbatical, so you have risen, you know, in the proverbial corporate ladder. So we've dealt with the fact that you're young, but you're also a lady. And I think we can't ignore the fact that, I mean, it's a little bit harder for a lady in the workspace. How are you processing all this? I mean, how are you as a young female within this corporate environment? Smart, yes, but you have something sort of that would work to your disadvantage. So how are you processing all this?
I think that's such an interesting question, because in advertising, I was always around women. Actually, in advertising, we even had a program called MIM, Men in Media. Like, we used to try and actively recruit men because we didn't have men in the agency. Right?
Interesting.
It was so interesting. It was a one space where women were more. My boss was a woman. Our CEO was a man, but I was surrounded by a lot of women. Clients were women. In Safaricom, we had men, but I don't know why. It felt like it was more equal, 50-50. Airtel is where I think there were more men, because Airtel was a lot more technical, right? But I tell you, Mokaya, it is so ironic, but I think in each of those spaces, and I do think this is true of most of Kenya, not all jobs, but I think a large number of corporate Kenya, where being a woman nowadays is an advantage. Right? Like, people want to put you in front because you are the minority, right? You are, and then if you were smart and you were well articulated, they're like, even better. What I actually struggled with in advertising was sexism, like sexually loaded conversations, right? Where someone makes an inappropriate comment. Or I used to have, oh my goodness, I used to have a boss who, he wanted us to dress in a certain way. He liked beautiful women, and if you were not beautiful, he used to get up frustrated. So he'd come and you have a bad wig, and he says, please take the day off and figure out what is happening with you. And I remember there's one, and he used to like us wearing heels, but I never used to wear heels. I never used to bother with my hair. And I remember a male colleague made a comment, oh, I think you dress like this because so-and-so knows you're smart, which was an argument for the reason he doesn't pressurize you is because what you're giving in brains is worth you not wearing heels, right? So you get statements like that, which were wrong, but I don't know, I think we had accepted it in the environment. So I would say it was interesting because the things were happening, but I also know I had very many moments where, for example, my company sponsored me and took me to Italy for 4 days, just on a women's retreat I mean, the things I benefited from because I was a woman. So it wasn't as I would imagine. In banking, I think it's much more different. I think banking is hard. But in advertising, I felt like, in fact, the more eccentric I looked, the more beneficial it was for me.
Oh, okay. I think that's an interesting insight in terms of there are spaces and in the current marketplace where you'd actually be favored as a lady by virtue that you're a lady. And the reason why I think that's important and worth mentioning is sometimes just because of the historical quote-unquote baggage, it's easy for a lady listening to this or watching this, especially a young lady, feeling like there aren't opportunities for me. And perhaps you're just dealing with a historical bias that has been there. And the market has shifted. And there is space for you, for example. I think that will be something worth mentioning. Granted, like you've rightfully said, there's still spaces that are difficult, but there are spaces that are open and one can actually thrive.
That is true. I mean, I think government is still probably difficult. I think medical field is difficult. There's certain fields which just the design of the system is so patriarchal, or is designed in such a way that it's difficult, right? For example, I have a friend of mine who said being a doctor and being pregnant when you try and get your master's is like a death sentence, right? While for me, when I was expectant, my boss would fashion the meeting hours around my breastfeeding time. So she'd say, Marian feeds her baby around this time, so we can't have the meeting then, you know? So there's a lot more agility for me and for my needs. And again, the thing about unconventional careers and paths is that they're agile. You know, the moment you allow your children or people to find paths that are less flashy, but is they're agile. And so they can thrive in the way that I thrived. But I agree, some careers are still quite difficult.
Now, in fact, you brought me to something, because before we went on a break, we began that conversation about unconventional career paths. And as we are having this conversation about everyone has something to offer, I think that would be something to touch on, because like you said, we are still stuck in the doctor, engineer. And then now we are seeing more cases of disillusionment, because I was actually told that if I study hard and get into this career, then my life will be sorted. And now there's disappointment, there's no job.
That's true.
You get employed, you see what we had with, intern doctors. You know, the salary is, and now there's disillusionment in terms of that. Just speaking to that space for my ambitions, my passions, my gifting, my skill may not be in the conventional paths, but yet there is still something one has to offer.
I mean, I think, so to be honest, in fact, my husband would probably say, even the use of the word conventional and unconventional is unfair, because who determined it, right? And I think there's, without going into the depths of it, you also have to recognize this historical revolutions that caused the careers we have to be the ones that are important. Like, now the whole craze is AI, right? And I'm sure there's a dad somewhere telling their child, you need to do AI because it's the next, right? And I understand why we do that, because we want to secure our future. I understand that. But I honestly sometimes sit and think, it is ironic, and I've seen it with a lot of our friends, and I'm sure people have seen it, where people who are successful but hate their jobs, who earned the money but wish they'd done something else. And I think that maybe the first point is questioning, what do you actually view as success to begin with? Right? Because if it's money, there's many ways to make money. But if it is feeling that you're in a space where your skills and talents, where you're appreciated, where you're valued, where you're challenged, is what you're seeking, then you have to look outside of your convention, right? So for example, one of the things I call myself is I'm an insight explorer, right? Which is just, I love asking myself questions about human behavior. There's no particular career or course that I did for that. It's something I've developed as I've allowed myself, you know, to go with the flow around the jobs that I've had. And so I think there's something interesting around how much is a gap. I want to say, how much do we allow ourselves to genuinely question, what do I think I am good at? What do I think I'd want to try? And actually being able to try that. So the example I give is, so my 4-year-old son, there's a time he really wanted to be a taka-taka. He still does want to be a taka-taka, like the guys who collect garbage.
Garbage
he thinks
collector.
They're cool, they hang out from the door. And I remember one time asking my husband, if he actually said, this is what I want to go into, would you be okay with it? And we had a whole debate. And I was like, he's like, I mean, yes, but you can see there's some discomfort. And I was like, it is interesting, but I would imagine if my child gets the education and the exposure and ends up going into the taka-taka space, I imagine he'd create the coolest garbage collection company that exists. And there's pride in being able to say, hey, how does your knowledge allow you to create a taka-taka company that is, you know, innovative, where your employees love. So that's what I mean. Like, the moment you allow yourself to see more, you actually, like, there's a lot more opportunity for us to impact the world when we allow ourselves to enter into the spaces where I think we're more naturally inclined to enter into.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that. Just touch on, You did international relations. Ever practiced anything to do with that?
Only now. Imagine.
Oh, now.
Only now. Imagine. Imagine.
So we've gone full circle.
Imagine 14 years later, I got hired by an NGO, a humanitarian organization. And I was like, this is wild. Who would have thought that this is when I would actually use it? And it's interesting because one of the reasons they said they were curious about my CV is because I hadn't worked in NGO. And they wanted somebody who wasn't used to the NGO world so they could bring a new perspective. So it's like, isn't that weird?
Yeah.
But yes, so about 13 years later, I moved into humanitarian.
Okay, let's get into that space. So you left agency, took a sabbatical, and now you got into the humanitarian space. So what do you do in that space? So
the title is Director of Customer Insights. And it's interesting for several ways because we work with people who've been displaced, right? And the reason we say customer insight, we're talking about refugees or the people who've been displaced. But we don't use the word refugee because refugees don't want to be called refugees, one. And then two, being a refugee is a state. It's not it's a part of your journey. It is not the complete journey. And so the organization wanted to be very intentional about reminding each and every person that refugees have power. And there's something about the word that is refugee that completely removes away any power. You're only seen as a beneficiary. Right? But when you use the word customer, people see, oh, you're a customer, meaning I have a product and service I'm offering you and you have choice. So what I spend my days doing is trying to see how do we get better at seeing people who've been displaced as customers. How do we give them power back? How do we listen more and allow, co-create with them? So what we do is we need to design a shelter. Could we design it with them?
So you don't just come and put up a structure, tell them, hey, here's shelter for you.
No, I mean, I don't think we need to. And when we've seen, when we've done that, when organizations have done that, the people redesign their house, they move in and they break down walls and do it either way. So why waste the energy? Why not actively do it with them, save resources, but also it's more sustainable because then they're invested in it. The story I think that's really good to give is there's an NGO that builds, you go into an area, you see dryness and people look poor, you build boreholes. And the boreholes Mukaya kept being filled up. So they come and find the boreholes have been filled up with like soil or rocks and they're wondering what's happening. And they think it's bandits who are doing it. And they later realize it was the women. Right? Because the women were saying when we walk to the river is when we get our 4 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours of alone time. As women. We go to the river, we bathe, we swim, we wash our clothes, we giggle, we laugh. Now that you brought the well here, my husband is like, it's only 10 minutes. Why are you gone for 4 hours, right? And so sometimes we give solutions to problems we have no knowledge of because we assume we have the answers. I think what I've valued about where I work is they're very clear. People, it goes in that conversation, they have something to offer us. And actually we benefit by allowing and giving them the power to share that with us. I like something you've said. So you don't refer to the people you work among as refugees intentionally. Just what is it about labels that seem to limit us? Oh, that is such a good word. That's such a good question. I think because words are power. And I don't mean it in the scary, I've had those things where, witchcraft, and I don't mean like that, But what I think I mean is I think our brains respond to words, right, that they've heard, and we associate words with specific things. In certain parts of the world, when they think of Africa, they think of lions and Maasais and jumping, right? It's not, it's a word, right? And that's why we're trying to decolonize, right, words. We're trying to take back words and change them. I think even for us in that space, I think there's a label. It's interesting because the word refugee was not created by refugees. It was created by our world, right? To refer to this group of people this way. And what happens is then we respond only in the way this world is defined for us. And I think the day one of the customers said, why do you refer to us as that? Was a realization that we can't go around life labeling people and things and not recognizing the power or the delimiting power you offer those people by labeling them in the same way. It is, to be honest, it is one of the reasons why I hate, the two words I hate may be strong, but I do not like the word youth, right? Whenever I see Youth Day, Youth Agenda, Youth Focus, I'm like, because it's a loaded word that means nothing. And I'm usually like, I know what we mean, but we're meaning it to say all people who are under this age. We don't actually use it to give power to that segment. But then the other word is the word empower. because then power insinuates Mokai had no power to begin with. I've had to give it to him. When I think there's an acknowledgement, you share power back, right?
Okay.
I mean, one of the best examples we give our staff is we tell them, we have to co-create with our customers, refugees, and they ask us why. We're like, okay, fine. Why do you mean why? They're like, why do I have to share the decision making with them? I'm okay, fine. Who gave you the right to make the decisions? And they say, my donors. Who gave the donor the right to give the decision? They're like, the government. Who gave the government? And as you go through it, you realize you only have the ability to make this choice because people have given it to you. But if refugees didn't exist, you wouldn't have this power. So you have two options. Either you acknowledge because of their existence, you have power to make a choice, or because you were given that power by other people, you yourself don't have right to refuse to share it, right?
Yeah.
And often you'd find people realize, because refugees exist, I have the ability to make a choice. And I must then therefore share it with the person who's given me the power to have it, right?
Yeah.
And so there's, I think you're right, there's a lot of power around the words we give people and the labels we give. But I think there's value in perhaps changing how we use it, or redefining maybe when we use that word what we actually mean. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. I want us to welcome back. This is Motivation Monday, and what a conversation we are having. We do pray and hope that it is motivating to you. Everyone has something to offer. Also, let me just remind us at this point that we are able to bring you programs like this by virtue of partnership with men and women like yourself. And so if you will desire to be our partner, kindly feel free to send an SMS with the word partner to 20316 and someone will get back to you. Perhaps if you want to give just a one-time gift, feel free to do that through the pay bill number 316 and for account, kindly write your phone number. Let's get back to this conversation we are having today. Everyone has something to offer.
Yeah.
All right, now I like just, what we have built up to where we are right now. And so that, time doesn't bar us. Just getting into some of the lessons that you've learned, working with people that sometimes, unfortunately, we consider them to be, bottom of the barrel kind of a thing. We do not regard them highly. But in your interactions with them, and even this revolutionary way in which your organization tries to deal with them, what are some of the lessons you've learned? Even as we actually talk about today's subject, you have something to offer. Everyone has something to offer.
So I think one of the biggest things for me to come to realization was, I think in the world you have two choices we're constantly making, or two frame mindsets you get to choose from. One mindset is one of scarcity, right? Where you go around life or situations believing things are few, and we're all fighting for these few things that exist. And scarcity, by the way, is not only money. Sometimes scarcity is even love. You consider that there are fewer men than women, and so there's a scarcity mindset, right? And with refugees, one of the biggest, and let me say even with immigrants, right? If you look at other parts of the world, with immigrant crisis, is the belief that there is scarcity of resources. And when you allow people who are immigrants, who are not from here to come, is that they're taking away resources that are already very few, and yet they have no right to those resources. And then there's this other perspective, which is abundance, right? And the belief that people are abundant. Resources are scarce, but people are abundant, right? Because I can't pretend that we have more water than we know. The water is still the same amount, but people are abundant. And what do we mean by people are abundant? People come with experiences, people come with gifts, people come with talents that can ultimately change the perspective of scarcity. And let me give you an example. I think about the number of Kenyans, or more recently, the number of Kenyans or Africans that migrate to European countries. And it's been interesting because now I'm sure you've been seeing Canada is trying to recruit, right, immigrants. And I had a story 2 weeks ago about two organizations in Canada. I can't confirm because it was a story they were telling me that are trying to get 4,000 Christians or pastors to Canada.
Okay.
And the reason they're doing that from Kenya or from Africa is because they want to export value system. Right? They feel like the value system there is eroding, and there are people who are concerned about how do we get people who have value systems and can positively infiltrate, right? And what they've done is they've said the continent that feels like their value systems around family, around community are close to what we want is in Africa. And so now there's an active export of that, right? That's an abundance. Value system can be an abundance, right? I remember talking to I was with the, I think, Permanent Secretary of Diaspora, and she was sharing how Kenyans in America have influenced Chama, right? Chama and the idea of coming together to actually save towards a cause is an exported way of doing something as a Kenyan, right? And so I think one of my probes to her was, how does the Kenyan government consider export of value as an actual offering that we give, right? And so when you begin to realize people are abundant, you ask yourself, okay, how might we experience the abundance of having more Somalis in Kenya? What abundance does that community offer us, right? One of the ones I'll tell you is those people do business like nobody else, right? Yeah. And could there be something there? What is the abundance of having more Ugandans, more Rwandese in Kenya, right?
More Burundians.
More Burundians. Sometimes it's their food, sometimes it's their culture, sometimes it's their traditions, sometimes it's skill sets. So one of the things I tell guys is when I had dreadlocks for the longest time, my best dread stylists were, is it Congolese? That guy would do my hair in 30 minutes, it's done and it's fantastic, right? Just because of the way their hands move around with hair is very different. So there's an abundance of people, and the moment you begin to recognize this abundance, your perspective shifts. Because you realize you're actually gaining a lot more, and that their talent and their skill set can transform how you utilize this. The other example I'll give, and I don't know if people realize this, is like Kakuma and Dadaab, where the refugee camps are. The reason, there's a time I think the Kenyan government wanted to close them down, I think the former government, and there was an outcry. And the outcry wasn't just from refugees, it was from Kenyans themselves who have set up businesses. Those are, they're like towns. It's a whole, like it's a county on its own. The amount of money, there's trading going on, there's life there. But the life exists because the refugees are there. The moment you close the camp, the people were like, my businesses have no value anymore. The people have intermarried with the communities there, right? And so there's, I think one of the things I remember learning is that people, you have to believe that people are abundant, that there's something within them that is extra than you have. And then it changes your perspective of scarcity. But as long as you're existing within this mind frame of scarcity, you'll always see as though people are coming to take away from you and not to add into you.
And then how do you help an individual in the space that you work in? Because you could have that changed mindset. But sometimes, unfortunately, the very person that you are viewing as being abundant doesn't view themselves that way. So how do you change? How do you change that mindset?
It is interesting, but we believe by being abundant yourself. Right? I think people will respond to what they see, or you must teach behavior, you must teach the mindset. So for example, one of the things, whenever we go to, let's say one of the camps or settlements to do a session, and by the way, when I say session, I go sometimes to just do co-creation sessions with them. So we'll tell them, is there a business you have? They'll say yes. And we'll design around their business and help them, create ideas, ads. So we really try and make it fun and lively. But we go with crayons, we go with Play-Doh. So we try to make the session very experiential. And one of the things we always do is we always go with extra things to leave them with. Because we know at the end of the session, people will want to take, but they won't feel they have permission. So if my boss says, we purposefully put more than enough things on the table so that people, when they're told you can take, know that even if they take a lot, they cannot take all of it. So it's almost like you fight scarcity with abundance, right? And this I've even seen in my own life, and I'll use this example. I mean, many of you probably have ever hired a house help or a nanny in your house. And I don't know if you've experienced this, but one of the struggles I used to have is I'd tell me when things are getting over before they get over, so that I can order. And often I would find out the rice is over when I'm cooking, and the rice now needs to be removed, right? And I'd wonder, what is the reason they're unable to share with me that? And you realize part of it is the trauma they've had, where when the former employer, when they used to tell them something was over, they'd be accused of overeating, right? Or if you notice, I don't know if you guys have experiences where you leave the house and you go, you find there's food in the fridge that was not consumed because they don't feel they have permission for those things, right? And one of the ways we've tried to fight it in the house is abundance. We cook abundantly, and we actively tell our nanny, food in the fridge must be consumed. When we buy shopping, we buy wholesale so that she can feel like even if I take 2 cups of rice for lunch, the rice is more than I can consume, right? And I'm not saying that's a strategy for everybody, but we have seen it in the organization where when you fight scarcity with abundance, people don't understand it day 1, Mokaya, day 2. But imagine by day 4, they're like, by the way, imagine I can partake of this because it is enough, more than enough for me. And that begins a slow journey towards people letting down their guard, they no longer feel like you're threatened by them. They no longer feel like you're afraid of them. They actually begin to share opinions. And so I would say one of the ways we have done it is by being abundant ourselves in how we've treated them. And then, of course, the other thing we've done is we've been active about sharing power. And what do I mean by that? Again, I'll use the house of example because it's easier. Before, I used to do the menu for my home. But then recently, I think I said, well, actually, why not? So I'd sit with my nanny and tell her, what do you think we should cook, right? And so I acknowledge I have a choice to make. The choice lies with me, but I can share that choice with her. And it's so interesting how you immediately begin to see her ownership of those choices gets higher. My nanny, even if food is over and what we wanted to cook is not there, she'll think on her feet and redesign something new because she owns that menu because she co-created it with me. But before, when rice would get over, she'd call and say, Rice Imeisha, what do you think now we should? Because the choice you refused to do.
And the menu is
right. And you're the one who made the menu, so you're the one to decide, right? And we've also seen it the same thing with camps. The moment we co-create the choice, when we tell the customers, hey, we want to start a business, or we are willing to fund a business, do you want to start? And they start it. When that doesn't work out, you see them actually evolve and adapt because they co-own the choice with you.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Now, our time is almost up. I tell you, it flies so fast. As we wrap this up, everyone has something to offer. And I'm just thinking in terms of the different categories of people that will be listening to this. Somebody who's thinking in terms of their economic capacity, they're like, wow, I have nothing. Somebody who's thinking about their education level, somebody who's feeling they're disadvantaged because of previous life experiences, either abuse or whatever. And I just want you to speak into that space as we conclude our time together, because especially with your work among the refugees, it's something that you have actually seen, disadvantaged quite a bit by war or whatever has been happening in their countries. But still, you have seen everyone has something to offer. Just speak into that space as we bring this to a conclusion.
I mean, one of the stories that I think I remember hearing or reading about was when Kagame was doing this reconciliation villages, apology villages, where people had to come and apologize for the injustices they'd done. And I think he shares how, I think someone who'd had his entire family killed says, how dare you make me forgive them? After everything they've done to me, how do you ask me to be the one to forgive? And if I'm not wrong, I think Kagame tells them, because you're the only one with something to offer. You are the only one with forgiveness you can actually offer. They can't offer you anything, right? And so the power here lies with you. And I remember that was such a, again, it goes into that thing that what makes us human is our ability to give something, right?
What makes us human?
Is our ability to give, right? Is we give, we can actually give and offer something to each other, whether it's emotional, whatever, those offerings can be. And I think I've seen it in the refugee space where it goes back to even what you're saying. I think the hardest thing is truly to have someone who sees you in that way. That sounds like such a bad answer because it feels like it's out of your control. But I do think that's what faith does, if I'm honest. I think that's what God does, is that he sees that in you. And so you're actually able to have the confidence. The people I feel for more are those who have no one. They don't have a faith system. They don't have community. And so they must rely on the world's cues to give you. And the world will never tell you you're abundant. The world will tell you you're abundant if you do X, Y, and Z. And so I think one of the biggest things for me is if you're a believer and if you have a faith, then you do have someone who has told you you are abundant in very many ways. You are created in abundance and you will thrive in abundance in the future. And in this world, that there's many opportunities to use that abundance. For those who may not have that faith system, I think it's truly to ask, then why are you here? Right? Why have you been allowed to exist in this space and in this moment? I think it is truly because there is something the world wants or needs from you. And so being able to see yourself as offering something, I may not have an education, but imagine I can make people laugh, right? I may not have money, but I'm the person who's really good at listening and offering counsel, right? Or I'm reliable. If I'm asked to do something, I do it with all my heart, right? I see beauty in areas people don't see beauty. And that's what artists are made of. I hear music where people hear noise. I mean, there's a lot of intricacies around it that I'm like, if only we had the time to spend nurturing those, how much more colorful would the world be? So I think it's really, truly to just say, you are here ultimately for a reason. And so honestly, just my prayer that you can find spaces where you can thrive and see that come true.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Marian.
You're welcome.
I think my take home is to be human, is to have the ability to give. Wow. We have come to the end of our conversation today. Everyone has something to offer. Yes, including you who is listening, including you who is watching us, and perhaps are looking at your life circumstances and are wondering, what can I offer? By virtue that you have breath, you have something to offer. And we pray and hope that this conversation today has enlightened you, but even more has pushed you to go out there and actually offer the world that which the Lord has placed in you. Well, this is goodbye from us. We do pray and hope that this has been of benefit to you. Send us your feedback, your comment to 0316. Our SMS line 0786 316 316 is our WhatsApp line. After this is Praise the Lord. And so see you next Monday.